Welcome back to the Lou Perez podcast. My name is Lou Perez, and I'm happy to report that right now you can order my book. That's right, I wrote a book. It's called That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, on the death and rebirth of comedy. Follow the link in the description or head over to Amazon and search for Lou Perez, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. If you want other options on how you can buy my book, please sign up for my newsletter at thelouperez.com. You could also join my community at thelouperez.locals.com. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you could leave a 5-star review, that would be amazing. Whether you're a long-time listener or a first-time, 5-star reviews are lovely. If you're looking for other ways you can support me, you can do so by supporting my sponsors. If you're into CBD products, please check out palomaverdecbd.com. Use promo code LOU to get 25% off purchases over $75. And if you like cold brew, check out Black Organic Cold Brew at www.blvckbrew.com and use promo code LOU for free shipping. All right, let's go. I am very excited to be joined by my next guest. His name is Paul Rossi, and you could follow him at Paul D. Rossi, R-O-S-S-I, on Twitter. And before we started recording, he told me reach out to him. His DMs are open, so that you're either calling for I don't know. There could be trouble, Paul. On that
there could be trouble, but I try to respond to trouble as best I can. Given the constraints of how mean people can be, or how many of the bots I have to respond to of pretty girls from all over the world. You get those, right? You get those DMs.
You know what? I've been getting, my inbox has been flooded with subject lines that say, the penis trick feminists don't want you to know. The penis trick feminists don't want you to know. And a part of me is, I'm kind of intrigued, and I kind of want to click on that and see like, well, what kind of trick could this possibly be?
I don't know. I guess you have to click to find out. I'm sure there's more than one. And why would the feminists not want you to find out? Is it because they're afraid that they'll like it? I'm not really sure.
I already thought that we were winning, that the phallic nature of the patriarchy was already keeping them oppressed. So who knows?
Yeah.
But so Paul, talking about possibly getting into trouble. I mean, I guess you could say that you have gotten in trouble over the past few years. For my listeners out there, I've been following Paul for a little while now. Really, I try to listen to him anytime he appears on any podcast. And one conversation in particular was really in depth, and I really enjoyed it. Was with Wesley Yang that you gave. I don't know if it was this year or maybe late last year.
Oh yeah, I think it was maybe late last year. I can't remember myself, but it was. Yeah, that was really interesting. I've been a fan of his for a long time. I was thrilled that he wanted me to be on. I think he did a Twitter Spaces or Clubhouse, one of those things.
Yeah, and it was like a 3-hour, sort of deep dive. So that's not what this is going to be. So
okay,
just any bathroom breaks, you'll have time to hold it.
Okay.
But for those of you who for those out there who don't know your story, maybe we could just start on kind of like what got you on the radar with all this stuff. And at was it Grace Church, the school?
Yes, Grace Church School. Historically, it's been a K-8 school, elementary school for over 100 years. And then 9 years ago, 10 years now, they opened a high school, and I was part of the inaugural faculty of that. So I was in the math department. I was a math teacher mostly, although we had teachers there do some double duty. I had an advisory, which is a small group of students that we shepherded through the 4 years. And then also I taught some philosophy classes, which were really interesting. And it was a wonderful job. I really, I was a career changer in my 40s. I used to do project management for websites. And before that, I had a number of odd jobs. But I was thrilled to teach, and I really enjoyed it a lot. I slowly got better through the years, and feel like I'm halfway decent at this point, but because of the change of the mission of the school in 2015, and even a little before that, they became really they went from sort of progressive to extremely woke and quote unquote anti-racist, and I started to see it really leach into all parts of the curriculum, and so I started chronicling it to myself because I felt like this was not having a positive impact on students. I could see it. Students of all ethnicities and backgrounds. It wasn't conducive to their psychological health or their intellectual health or any of these other things. So many other things, and so it kind of got progressively worse. I think for the culture as a whole in 2016 with Trump, and then with George Floyd in 2020. So at one point during the pandemic, we had a Zoom meeting for the students, for the entire school, so faculty, students, and admins, around self-care. But it was done through an anti-bias lens, it was called, and it was done segregated. So white identified students and faculty were in one Zoom room, and BIPOC, Black or Indigenous people of color, staff and faculty together in another room. And so they had different scripts for you depending on your race.
So that, yeah. So, I mean, there's so much to unpack there,
Yeah.
if you will, but I'm just imagining the person who, creates the two different links and is like, okay, you're going to click on this link and you're going to click on this link. And
right.
I mean, I'm trying to think. I went to public school in Queens. I grew up in Woodside, and I went to public school from pre-K all the way through 8th grade, and then I went to a Catholic high school. And obviously, when I went to school PS 151 across the street from the Woodside Project, so I knew my class. I knew who was Black. I knew who was Puerto Rican. But the idea that it would be kind of written down on your permanent record so that people would be going through the Rolodex or whatever and saying, okay, you're in this group and you're in this group, and then here are your two different Zoom links. That just seems really weird.
Yeah, and not only to the person who makes the two links, but it's also propagated by the dean of students of the school, and there are several DEI cadres within the school and that are pushing this. Now, the reason for segregation is different, but I think it has the same negative effects. And the idea is that BIPOC students need to be segregated. They won't use the word segregated, but effectively they are protected in a safe space from the harm they might feel by white people enacting whiteness, enacting their sense of privilege or their utterances and prejudgments and revealing biases that might re-traumatize the students or the faculty as well. Adults can be traumatized by this as well, around their assumptions or simply just their gaze. I mean, there's this idea of the white gaze that, like you said, there's so much here, but basically it's a really a condescending kind of sheltering of students from the harm they might, that they're assumed to be under threat from.
So, for those of you out there who don't know the nomenclature, BIPOC. So you have POCs, which are people of color, and that wasn't good enough, or at least within the POC, the POC, there are even more oppressed people. So there you get BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, and it turns out I took a 23andMe. I found out that I am 4.8% Indigenous American. So that changes everything for me. This whole time I was going through life thinking one thing, and then it turns out, wow, I'm actually maybe like close to, well, you're the math teacher. I'm close to what, 20%.
That's like almost 5% 5 Elizabeth Warrens. That's
exactly.
good for you.
So So maybe we'll just talk about like sort of like the makeup of this school. Like I said, like I went to public school in Queens. This school is it the East Village in Manhattan?
Yeah, it's just south of St. Mark's Place, right below the Cube, the Astor Place Cube.
Okay.
And it's a really nice, it's a nice area now, except for the NYU students. They're just
that's where I went. That's where I went.
Yeah.
I
You went to NYU,
yeah, I was part of the problem
that's right.
over there.
Yeah.
So like, what's the makeup of the school
one of the nice things, I mean, it's a plus, and I think is that we as a school, I'm still saying we, even though I'm no longer there, but just force of habit, is that we have one of the larger minority populations. We're still what's called a PWI, which is a predominantly white institution. They're very conscious of racializing everything. So everything is really foregrounded when it comes to race. But we have, I think, 35% BIPOC, people from different backgrounds than white, or what's called white, I think. And so that comes with some cultural differences in some cases not, and so I think that creates for a dynamic, a more dynamic community in some ways. There are also some real fractures in the sense of wealth distribution, right? So you have some kids who are going to the islands for their vacation in the Caribbean or somewhere, and there are some kids that are going to go to take care of their cousin in their 2-room apartment in the Bronx, right? So that there are those kind of wealth effects that are can be very difficult sometimes for kids, because maybe they feel shame around poverty, or they feel shame around not being included in some things. And
are those kids there on scholarship, because it costs quite a bit, right?
Yeah, I would say they are, and so that's also another factor, is that not every parents are full paying parents, and these are these are difficulties to maintain a community, right. And so the school, I think, in a not entirely misguided effort, is trying to create a sense of belonging for all the kids within this very privileged place. Everyone is privileged to be there. There's no doubt about it. It's $55,000 a year to go there if you're full paying, and they want everyone to feel included. I think that's admirable. I think it's necessary that no student feels less than just because they're not full paying. I mean, everyone is a part of the same community. But I think what they've done is they've latched onto this racialized, this anti-racism as a sort of a means to sort of squelch and get everyone to buy into this thing, to keep the white kids sort of flagellating themselves and diminishing themselves, in a sense, to sort of even things out in a sense of status. And then the BIPOC kids are given a kind of a moral authority, a sort of a moral credit on things to just sort of balance out maybe the material disparities. And it has all sorts of add-on consequences, that when you create a two-tiered system of authority, in a way, like either it's moral authority, or a child's ability to speak themselves freely in class, and you say that if one child says this, they're going to be harming another child just by virtue of them having to listen to it. Yeah. We're talking about high school now, by the way. It really does distort the student experience to a significant degree, and I had many students come to me and talk about that.
I'm thinking back to like my own experience in school, and for the 6th grade, I was in a magnet program at PS 122, which is somewhere in Queens, I think in Astoria or something like that. And I actually had the really cool privilege of going back a few years ago. Like it was I think alumni week. And they were asking alumni to go back to talk about college, with these kids. And there I go, and I only did 1 year there before I went to a different middle school. And I'm sitting on stage and looking out at what you would expect to find in Queens, which is just like, I mean, it's the most diverse place on the planet, And my dad is an immigrant, and I look out and I see a lot of kids whose parents are definitely immigrants. They're in this really competitive public school system. A lot of them are taking early entrance exams to go to Bronx Science or Stuyvesant and all that. And a lot of these kids are Black and brown, and I know from the kids that I grew up with, the Black and brown kids, like, in these programs, like their parents are like, you're doing homework, you're doing extra homework, you are going to, in a sense, kick ass academically and say, and kind of like, I don't know, show these private school kids that not only can you compete, but you're better, So to see like a private institution like Grace Church sort of open up their doors to these types of kids and say that they're victims and they're being harmed and all that, rather than, no, this is going to be your stepping stone to eventually becoming a doctor and all that. It's really hard for me to wrap my head around that. And you as a teacher, I mean, must be, well, for one, and I'm going to remind everybody, you were a math teacher,
Yeah, math, some philosophy, but mostly math. Yeah,
so the idea of like how are you like decolonizing math? How are you decolonizing calculus or pre-calculus and all that? It's insanity.
Yes, there is this idea that, and this came up in the anti-bias or the self-care through an anti-bias lens meeting that I was talking about earlier. But there is this idea that objectivity, and without objectivity, math is really kind of impossible. Objectivity is white or whiteness. It's a racialized construct, like individuality, or a bizarre suite of things. Some of them are actual virtues that are reframed as vices, and some of them are vices that everyone could possibly suffer or participate in. Things like perfectionism or
individualism. I know that.
Fear of open conflict. There's a list of about 15 of these things, which are really taken as gospel by these schools in general, and anywhere that you see a focus on anti-bias or whiteness studies or whatever. There's absolutely zero legitimate scholarship behind it. Just as a side note, I've looked into it, and other people have. That is something that I definitely felt from the faculty, colleagues, and the administration while I was there. This idea that math is somehow a cold, impersonal, and whiteness is this concept that really has broadened to include so many different things that an entire discipline could fall into it. Is very interesting to me. Even though one of my closest colleagues is a Black woman, she was a good teacher. She taught me a lot. She was kind of a mentor to me, and she was very rigorous. But somehow this idea that Black people do math in some different way, or that it's to be culturally competent, what would that be exactly, and why would you pervert the expectations of the Black kids by thinking that they have to do math in some more indigenous way, or I don't know what they have to use. They can only play Mancala or something like that. What is that? So it's bizarre to me. It's bizarre, and it sort of harkens back to a lot of the Afrocentrism of the 70s, 60s, and 70s. Around, which is taken on a sort of a critical social justice cast to it. But there's a lot there. I may be kind of rambling a bit.
No. It's I mean, it's interesting. It's happening now, but it feels so alien, but also like so make believe. It's like, oh, let's just let's just pretend a little bit, let's just play act. Let's
Yeah,
let's
that
go
way.
with this. Yeah.
There's this idea in every society of the lie agreed upon. The idea it's the ruling ethos of a place, and there's always a great deal of truth to it, but there's also a way in which it can't be challenged. And the ruling ethos of these schools is really critical social justice, and the expectations that your racialized self is socially determinative of your experience, and that if you are white, you must embrace that and preface everything around race with, as a white male, as a person of privilege. And these ritualistic utterances, it doesn't really matter what you say after them at all. All that matters is that you simply perform the ablution of speaking from your racialized and gendered self or sexual self.
And the utter contradictions too, where this idea of objectivity doesn't exist, or even truth doesn't exist, but all this bullshit that we're saying that needs to be taken as gospel.
Right.
That it's like it could say, if you were playing by the rules or no rules, well, it's like, well, everything you're saying is bullshit. So we don't have to abide by it.
Relativism doesn't really hold water because what's your superstructure? And so the idea is that, well, okay, the critical lens, the critical analysis can only look at everything outside of it. It can never turn on itself. But it's privileging itself, and just like any worldview does.
And the whiteness stuff, I think you brought this up on another person's podcast. My apologies, I'm forgetting the name of the host. But this idea of race is a social construct, but yet you have to accept it, even though it's a social construct.
That's the thing that really is so fascinating to me. Like, I agree that it is a distortion, a gross distortion of population genetics and everything. I would agree with the wokest people on that. The way that, but they conclude that this distortion is so pervasive and overwhelming to individuals who grow up within that context that they cannot help, despite their protestations, they can't help but look at each other as racialized objects, racialized subjects, which are, if they're racialized, they're kind of objects, and then make assumptions about them. So because everyone else is doing it, well, then we kind of have to talk about it and acknowledge that we're doing it. And if anyone demurs and says, no, I'm not doing it, well, then you're in denial. So it is a hall of mirrors, which is self-perpetuating, from which the only escape is somehow if everyone comes to terms with their own biases, which are invisible to them, and you must rely on the experts to tell you what they are and the other to tell you what they are. Well, then somehow we're going to transcend this thing, this massive delusion. I think we have to simply let it go. It would be my thing. And that's kind of what I did at the meeting, which got me in trouble, which was to say, and I put this in the chat, and this was the thing that they kept returning to when they raked me over the coals in the private meetings that followed, was to what extent must I see myself as society sees me? In other words, if whiteness is a social construct because everyone else sees me as white, well then, and I didn't want to say do I or don't I. I wanted people to think about it's a continuum, like how much, because we all do. We are all affected by society. We are, the germ of truth to this is that, we do see ourselves and others in many ways, the way that society tells us to, but it's not complete, and it's not 100%. And what is it? Is it 50%? Is it 30%? There comes a point when, once you recognize it, in fact, you have an obligation to look at people as individuals and to see through it. And in fact, the very people who are writing the books telling everyone that you can't see through it, that you have to act as a function of race and racism, these are the people who above all should know better, and should be able to let it go. But they're too busy talking about how they can't help it. They have to see themselves as diminished because they're Black and society sees them as Black. And so, you know, all of these gyrations of pride and shame that come out of that are seen as a kind of a liberatory, when in fact they're just recapitulating the same stuff. And we're teaching the kids to recapitulate the same stuff, when really we should be treating them to see through race and see people as individuals, and that society's view of them as racialized beings is flawed. Just like when they discovered that the earth wasn't flat, let's just say that you discover the earth isn't flat, right? Do you spend 50 years trying to undermine your bias that the earth is flat? Do you not simply just accept, oh no, it's round because the science says it's round? But no, we're going through this navel gazing around our presumed inability to stop thinking that the earth is flat. And I would say, you know, no, just cut the Gordian knot, man. Just, you know, have a real interaction. And there's going to be moments where maybe you're acting out some societal presumption about somebody, but don't imagine that infects 100% of your communications and that race is always in the room. Like that's a bizarre assumption.
Yeah, there's an author, Wilfred Reilly. He wrote a book, Hoax, about like hate crime hoaxes. That's really worth reading. It's a really great compendium of that. He's a great follow.
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of Will.
Yeah, he's a great follow on Twitter, and you know, he's one of these guys who is all about crunching the numbers and getting the stats. And one theme that he consistently goes back to are sort of like all of the different characteristics that, you know, lead to success or privilege, you know. And what people, it seems like the people that you know you had to have your run-in with fail, either they don't want to see, or there are all of these different things that will, you know, play a role in how much privilege, quote unquote, you have versus not. So if race is one of 10 different variables you're dealing with, well, what are some of the other variables? Well, you know, you got some ugly fucking white people, you know, ugliness, shortness, intelligence, you know, these are all things like, you know, if you're on the spectrum, you know, how are you, you know, socially, you know, with people, are you an introvert versus an extrovert, you know? Do you have, you know, better, you know, verbal skills than, you know, analytical skills, all this stuff. And I don't know, maybe
I would add to that privilege is contextual, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how pretty or ugly you are if you're taking a test or something.
Right.
It doesn't matter how smart you are if you're in a bar trying to pick up girls, you know, and you don't know the social cues. It actually works against you.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. But I think that the having that one variable that explains everything is very easy for people, and it also masks a lot of the really those kinds of things that people are actually more loath to talk about. And you can't like virtue signal. Like, what if I virtue signaled that I was, you know, listen, as a very smart person, let's say I am. I may not be, but so you know, I know that I have brain privilege. I mean, can you imagine somebody listening to that and not just wanting to smack me across the face, right? But no, I can say white privilege because we are all right. There's this democratization implied in that somehow. Like, we're all white. Doesn't matter how much of all these other privileges I have, right? We, you know, like, so it's this weird intimacy that you get from talking about race.
Yeah, and also it's sort of, you know, I think people bring up agency a lot, and it's sort of like, I guess if you're a type of person who embraces whiteness, like, yeah, you know, this pretty evil, you know, it's this whiteness thing, but look, I can't really change it. And you look and you see like, oh, you're able to afford $55,000 a year to send your kid to school. Yeah, you are just like the white kid in, you know, Appalachia, you know, who, you know, is getting you know, what was it? What kind of worm is that? Ringworm? Not ringworm. I forget what kind of
Bookworm.
worm. Yeah, yeah, or something like that. It's kind of like I don't know. There's almost safety in you know, taking on, you know, this group. You know.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. And with these elite schools, I mean, these are, when you talk about privilege, like these are people who have, you know, the top places in the Hamptons, like the head of school.
Right.
You know, he was from an incredibly wealthy place in the. I think he had like one of the biggest mansions in the Hamptons or something like that. You know, I'm not holding it against him. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with having money. You know, whatever. The thing is, though, that, you know, that can be kind of alienating and weird, right, to talk about. But, and, you know, I knew really wealthy kids in college too, and they're always a little bit, you know, suspect, and like they worry that people are kind of glomming onto them or whatever. But like, if you have this anti-racism thing, well, then it creates, it effaces those boundaries, and suddenly it allows you to, the moment that you claim a privilege, you're actually claiming the same privilege that Appalachian guy has, which is that we are all in this together. And so now, what does it mean if you happen to be, this is, I find this really interesting. So, you know, they talk about the racial wealth gap, right? So the median white person makes, has 7 times the wealth or 8 times the wealth of the median. Now that's, if you look at the bottom 50% of the distribution, that the wealth gap between the bottom 50% of white people and the bottom 50%, you know, bottom in terms of wealth of Black people, is 3%. That is 97% of the wealth difference is in the upper half of both. And when you get to the top 1%, it's extremely dramatic because we have a lot of income inequality. So imagine that you're a white person in that bottom 50% being lectured at by a white person in the top 1% about your privilege, and they're using that statistic against you. What would you do? How would you feel? You would give 2 big middle fingers to that person, right? Because when you look at, you know, you're looking at people around you and they're like, no, actually, the reason why we don't have a wealth gap because no one has any wealth, or we don't have any savings, right? So that is, you know, to my mind, that's the tremendous elitism that I think is driving a lot of the political things.
I was at a party a few weeks back, and I actually met a couple who had kids who went to Grace Church, and actually I said I think I had reached out to you around that time to try to get try to, you know, make this happen, and I brought up I brought you up, and the mother. I don't want to give too much away because I don't want to, you know, someone might identify with there. But let's just say both their kids went from Grace to a very you know, one of the Ivy Leagues, where they had a terrible time because it was sort of a, you know, a continuation of the stuff that they were going through, you know, is in grammar school and high school, in college, and the mother was exactly, woke stuff, and I think when they got to college, there were these very awkward meetings with like RAs where they needed to I would call it testify, you know, know, it was religious in nature, you know. But the mother was telling me the story, and one of the things she brought up, and it sounded just fucking bonkers. So I want to run it by you just because you heard anything about it. She said there were these really upsetting lessons in sex ed happening where let's just say that it wasn't sexual education wasn't just about how our babies made. It was like, here's how to put a condom on, and just so you know, there are people who do things called fisting and like that. And okay. So maybe you could talk to me, tell me a little about it, because she was telling me this, and like, I'm a pretty, you know, I'm an adult. I'm a comedian and all that. And she was telling me this, and I thought she was making it up. I'm like,
they talk about like electro, you know, torture porn, and like it's crazy. Like,
really,
this happened at a school just last year. There was a there's a sex educator there who came in, a consultant. I think her name is Julianne Fonte. And she, she taught this lesson that was, exposing high school kids, but like to some really dark stuff on the internet, S&M and bondage and stuff. And the kids told their parents, and they're texting their parents like, what is this? And it became a kind of a scandal. They wrote about the New York Post, the usual places. But the thing driving it, the thing behind it, which is really fascinating. I've seen the conferences where they push this stuff as, the next wave of sex ed, and why it's really important to talk about these things. And it's being pleasure positive, sex positivity. So this idea that shame, and this is not a new idea. This actually goes back to the 1920s, in the progressive education, where sex is really just like any other activity, and it needs to be normalized. And the pleasure that human beings derive from it is perfectly healthy, right? And so masturbation, I don't know if you remember this, it might have been before your time, but there was someone who worked for a Democratic administration that was brought on, and she promoted masturbation. Remember this?
Yeah.
That was a scandal back then. That's tame now, right? Like that.
That was like in the 90s, I think.
Yeah. I forget her name, but that was in the same vein. So whether it's a forest of dildos going God knows where, or electro porn or whatever, it's all, if it's done consensually, and if it's done with your eyes open and everyone's okay with it, well then, huzzah, go crazy. And so the other strand of this is that, there's three strands. The other strand of it, which is connected to the third strand, is that kids are doing it anyway because they're going to have sex and they're going to do crazy things, and rather than leave them with their guard down around people who may not be experts at it and can explain how normal and natural and good it is, they may be manipulated or abused unless we, the experts, can get to them first and tell them, how to use it responsibly, right? And it's the same thing with drugs. Like, you're going to learn about drugs. Here are the drugs, and it doesn't matter if you haven't thought of it before. We're going to think about it in a controlled environment, so that when you do, experience it later, you're going to know what it is, and you're not going to have somebody, fist you without your consent. That's basically the philosophy behind it. And then the third strand, which is connected to the second, is that it is a gravy train for these people. Like, they get to intermediate and facilitate and clarify all these things for people, and they get paid for it, and they get to, they wind up putting themselves at the center, which is a lucrative place to be.
It's funny because the mother that I spoke to, she said that, one of the reasons that they gave was, they didn't want the kids to, be walking down St. Mark's and hear this stuff for the first time on St. Mark's, I guess in an uncontrolled environment. When you talk about, like how lucrative that is, and these people like putting themselves in the center of it, like my wife and I, we went out to dinner a few weeks ago. We have two little ones, and one of them, the youngest, is finally like sleeping, for a stretch of time. So we went out to dinner from like 7:30 and got back at 10. And we had a local teenager come just to be in the living room, and just in case a fire happens, she's there to help. And I remember one day I asked him, like, so you go to any good restaurants around here? She's like, yeah, I like the pizza place, over there. And I'm just thinking, I'm speaking to like a teenager. I have no idea. Like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm a grown man. I'm like, this is so weird, even just talking to a teenager. The idea that I would be commanding a salary to go and speak to teenagers about fisting and electrocuting somebody, your lover's clit, in order to get them off, and then answering Q&A on that is batshit crazy to me. There's like,
Yeah.
there has to be something beyond just the financial incentive there.
Yeah, no,
to
I mean,
be
a lot
into
of these
crazy,
people,
man.
I will also say that it's a pattern that I noticed in my schools, among my colleagues. Maybe, we had great relationships with them. They're interesting people, but they tend not to be they tend to be working out some issues, some of them, around the kids. And, I had a colleague who would call the kids her babies, like and these are high school kids. Like the babies, the babies aren't ready for this. It's this very strange, sort of overly maternal, overly nurturing, but also they get to be like the den mother, and they feed off of the attention in a way, and they get to be like the cool kids for once, like around other kids. Like they're not behaving they're not behaving like adults in a way. Like it lets them they kind of enjoy knowing things that the kids don't know, that are curious about. And, wouldn't you like to know about this? Like it is, I'm not, is it grooming? Is it not grooming? I don't know. But I mean, it's clearly, ideologically it's grooming, and you're talking about that stuff. And it is exploiting the curiosity, the natural curiosity, adolescent curiosity, to promote things with this. And I think that's the most dangerous thing, this idea that somehow sex is like anything else, right? It's not like learning the phases of the moon. Okay. It's not, because you can't get pregnant from the phases of the moon. You can't get a social disease, and it doesn't mess with your emotions in the same way. It doesn't have all these possible consequences. But they talk about it that way. They say that if we could only demystify sex, if we could only put it in this tame place where everyone can understand and agree that and we're all going to be consensual, and no one's going to ever want to do anything that anyone else doesn't want to do. It's like eating pizza. They even had a poster on the wall in my school that was like having sex is like having pizza. What do you want on your pizza? Do you want a slice of pizza? Yes. You should ask before you take a slice of pizza. Right. So, but it's not. All right. And even Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, said, sex is not a glass of water. It is a categorically different set of human actions and behavior and thoughts and all of these different things. And we do need to draw lines around it. And we do need to, constrain curiosity around it. There are ways to do that responsibly. And I think that they don't understand that they're playing with fire. And I think that they are, like so many social reformers, caught up in the idea of a utopia without actually knowing what they're dealing with. Because sex by its very nature and sexual desire is transgressive. And if you try to normalize, a bunch of stuff, you're not taking that away. You're simply moving the boundary, and you don't even know what's going to come back past that boundary. So I just think that I guess I'm more of a traditionalist in some ways. I want to be a responsible traditionalist. I don't want to pretend that kids aren't curious and going to learn stuff. But I think that you really need to draw lines around what is the job of a school. I mean,
I was just going to ask that.
like,
I'm like, what is education? Yeah, what is education now?
Yeah, go to your parents. But they say, the parents don't know. The parents are checked out. We know better than the parents. The parents can't be trusted. They really talk about parents this way. They are openly contemptuous of parents. I'm gonna be frank. Like at the faculty lounge, when the door closes, and there's some of that's, I think, it's just a natural thing. Just the same way if you were flipping burgers at a fast food joint, you'd complain about the customers, right? Because the parent is the customer. But the presumption, the condescension, and the intellectual superiority that they have towards parents, that to me is, that to me is a problem. And the idea that, we're going to presume to know better about all these different things, that, we're experts at everything.
Yeah.
And that's the way to advance your career within the system of particularly independent schools, private schools, is you set yourself up as an expert in these things, which are deeply sought after, DEI, sex ed, all of these social, emotional stuff. And I wasn't interested in that. And the people who aren't interested in that, who just want to teach math like me, or philosophy, which I'm excited about. I love teaching philosophy. Those people are not going to advance in the hierarchy. So they're not going to become administrators. They're not going to be making decisions about the direction of the school or what they're going to teach the kids. So it's a real self-fulfilling, feedback loop.
Yeah.
You just keep getting more and more of it because those people advance and the other people just want to teach math.
You talked about, kids coming to you and feeling uncomfortable about, a lot of the anti-racism stuff and that they were being like subjected to. I imagine that there were, quite a bit of, parents as well who were upset about this, especially if you're laying down, God, it hurts to say it, $55,000 a year, I just don't understand how you could have fuck you money and go along with this stuff.
It's surprising, right?
Yeah, I've made the mistake of saying fuck you without having the money behind it. So I can't imagine having that kind of bread and allowing this to happen.
Well, it really is a social cage in a lot of ways. I mean, and I listen, I have sympathy for these parents, but I also am of two minds. Like at some certain point, you have to be a good parent. You can't subject your kids to this. But I would say, from their perspective, what is happening is there is that narrowing of the marketplace around these schools, and this idea that this is your entry into the Ivies, the high, and that this is high stakes stuff. It's very status driven. It's very reputation. Mothers like to talk about their kids, of any, at any income level. But at a certain, at these income levels, it's like, oh, where's your child? Well, my child has got into my. And all that stuff seems namby-pamby, but it actually matters a lot. And that there are other structural things in place. So, for example, the enrollment contract. So these enrollment contracts that parents sign, they're year to year. You're not guaranteed a spot. And those enrollment contracts will say some pretty one-sided things, like if you challenge us on the curriculum, you can be expelled. If you talk about the school, if you talk out of school about the school, you can be expelled. And there have been cases in recent years where the enrollment contracts have gotten even worse for parents, and kids have gotten expelled for the parents sending 2 emails to the administration complaining about the curriculum. That's it. You're gone.
Wow.
So, plus if you are, say, a hedge fund manager, or you work at Goldman Sachs or whatever, any of these places, Wells Fargo, and you challenge a curriculum and you get the reputation within this environment and this context for being a racist or being some troglodyte January 6th protester, which they do, which the DEI people will say, anyone who challenges this is like the January 6th insurrectionists. And I've got that on video from them saying this stuff. You can take you can lose clients, you can get a reputation. You're worried people are going to talk behind their back, and this is what puts bread on the table. Their croissants or whatever the metaphor is.
Whatever they are.
And so you wouldn't be doing your family legacy a favor. You might be taking risks. And there's also a tendency with these, wealthier parents to say, look, this is how we do business. Okay. In my professional life, I have to have a public face and a private face. You're just learning the ropes, kid. Okay. You just have to say what they want you to say, put your head down, get into college, and then later, when you're somebody, you can take a stand. But this is not the time to take a stand. And that's not how we do business, right? There, in a sense, it's this real kind of noblesse oblige aspect where you're going to pretend to do these things and say these things, but then the bizarre consequences that people aren't dumb, like they know they're faking it, and so they get now this idea of optical allyship is another. It's another cycle where you have to question yourself whether you're being an optical ally, whether you're really doing the work. So it's this whirlpool of self-reflection and self-interrogation that I was in Zoom meetings where the teachers were telling the kids, like, we need to hear from the white kids now. We need to hear that you're really doing the work. We need to hear that you're not just being an optical ally. And, the kids are just, sitting there kind of glumly, trying not to stand out. And the usual kids are saying all the right things. And And then there are the black kids there that are saying like, this is a waste of my time. Like, why am I even here? Like, this isn't about me at all, right? Because this is just about you celebrating and interrogating yourselves. Like, my experience as a black person is no better because of this. I have a point, like, yeah. So
yeah, I forget. I'm sorry, I forget who said it. It might have been historian Thaddeus Russell. I think he brought it up in conversation once, where it's sort of the one of the things about affirmative action was that it brought a lot of like black students to colleges that had never had black students before, so they became sort of like, I don't know, sort of like walking exhibits in a way, like an opportunity for, these, upper crust, privileged white people to interact with, with black people. We never interacted with them before. Wow, isn't this super?
You're a circus freak. Absolutely.
In a way,
I think that is legitimate. And I think that's in some ways a little better than it was. I think back then it was really weird, but it's still similar. And you can kind of see how they get exploited. One way they get given like way too much power and celebrated and pushed into things because it looks good for the school to have black faces in the marketing materials and the brochures. And some of the activism that you see with the black students demanding change groups is that they'll say, listen, don't put me in your catalog unless you give me a tuition break or you give me something, and I actually respect that. It's like, don't use me for your little virtue act. But, and it's not helping them, and it's giving them too much power. Like, I'll give you an example. So there's this group of black students demanding change. And they wrote a letter shortly after the George Floyd killing. And I'm going to read some of it because I think it's interesting. I just put up looking at it because it sort of gets to the heart of, and I want to see if it's, did I have it? Here we go. Okay, so
sure.
With the murders of dear head of high school, dear head of school, with the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and many, many more, social distancing due to the pandemic, police brutality, protests, and riots occurring in America, and these are about 9 students that signed the letter, we are writing to express our feelings about the importance of these final assignments and this final week of school. This was done in May, near the end of the school year in 2020. People of color in and outside of the school community are facing intense emotional labor right now. While it is fair to consider that the last week and assignments of school are important, our stresses, well-being, and mental health are more important. We aren't sure how to function and are struggling to focus on our schoolwork while simultaneously being frustrated, heartbroken, angry, and completely exhausted. And completely exhausted is in italics. We are being amazingly vulnerable and brave enough to complete assignments, show up to class, and participate in these discussions with our peers despite the emotional toll. There are even some ignorant posts and communication from some of our own members of the school community that is completely undermining the Black Lives Matter movement. Peers are voicing their white opinions, white is in italics, about how black and brown people should protest and use their voices. Their blatant disregard for our feelings and our concerns throughout this whole movement contributes to the feelings we have of exhaustion and helplessness. We constantly must be the ones to educate our peers, as if that is our responsibility, along with doing our schoolwork and coming to school every day as if everything is all right. So, okay, so this is, and then eventually they asked to have the last few days of school academics canceled, and they get it.
Pizza party? Is there a pizza party?
There's not a pizza party. But instead of a pizza party, what we get is 3 days of seminars on racial literacy and the importance of activism and social justice seminars. Like they substitute all this stuff for math, English, history, reading, all the things. And not only that, but the administration falls all over themselves and says, this is something that no one should have even asked us for. We should have known already to cancel classes. And, we celebrate your bravery at the graduation ceremony. This letter was read aloud as a testament to the students and their bravery and courage in saying this. And I'm thinking to myself, this is so sad. This is the most depressing thing I've had to sit through in a way, because we have crippled people. We have turned them into, we have enabled this. The administration really has been pushing all along. This is what social activism looks like. It's making demands. It's all of these things, and the demands are not about making. The demands are incredibly segmented, and overweening, and all these different things. And I just think, this is the fact that the administration, and cancel final tests, cancel final grades, all this stuff. I think they made it pass, fail. I mean, they did all these things to satisfy this group of eight or nine students, I think it was.
Wow. Yeah, it's and also, like,
how does that help these kids?
Yeah, exactly. How does it help? How do them? Yeah, when you redefine bravery.
Yeah.
To going to your really nice school in the East Village, being a kid, being a teenager, like you, or you redefine exhaustion. And
the thing is, the way to deal with it is to say, listen, we will not be moved. We are going to continue to expect of you the things you need to succeed in life. And that is the way to show racists that they're wrong. That's the dignity culture thing instead of the victim culture thing. And then, of course, the irony is that uptown, in the worst parts of town, in South Bronx, there are charter schools where they are teaching the kids the exact thing they need to do to succeed. Like you said about your public school, they're teaching them that if you make these choices, if you do these things in this order, if you graduate from school, then you get a job, then you get married, then you have kids. If you do those things in that order, there's only a 6% chance you're going to stay in poverty. And they hold them to it, right? And they give them a roadmap out of this morass instead of this constant pity party, frankly.
Yeah. I wrote a book. It's been the Chiron's been going there for the whole hour. Just in case anybody listening doesn't know, I wrote a book. It's coming out.
Is that the one with the Smiths album?
Yeah, with the
it's a great title.
And I reshot the cover with me as the Vietnam fight, American U.S. troop and soldier in Vietnam. So one of the chores, one of the grueling things that I had to do for my book was read. I'm sure you've seen this. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And this one, this is very large lettering. So like each stupid thing is just like hits me in the eye, like even harder because the font is so large. And so like pretty early on in it, it turns out he's from Queens.
Henry Rogers.
Yes. Yeah. He's a Queens kid whose parents sent him to private schools. And one of the things that he said that really stuck out to me was he said that he barely cracked 1,000 on his SAT. And it was around, and then him looking back, like, then he started to realize that intelligence is as subjective as beauty and all that. Right. And I was thinking about, sort of my own, how I did on my SATs, and I got I think it was 1360 or 1390, something like that. At the time you were allowed to combine your top two scores and then
the score.
And I was thinking, you know what? I could have gotten that 1400. I think it was maybe one or two questions would have got me a 1400. I could have studied more. I could have done a lot more prep. There were kids doing a lot more prep. Maybe I could have done better. I had a girlfriend at the time. Like if, I was a horny kid in high school.
SATs, girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly.
How old are you again? Yeah.
Exactly. Making out
That's not a
versus
fair
like,
fight.
versus doing this thing, I'm like, I could have done better, but I know that there was a cap on how well I would have done just based on not only how I take tests, but also just my knowledge. There's no way I'm getting an 800 on the math. No way whatsoever. Right. And I accept that. I accept my limitations. This guy, on the other hand, is so narcissistic, has so much hubris that it's got to be the system that's keeping him down, that he barely cracked 1,000, not because he's not smart enough. It's because the test wasn't made for him,
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking about this, like there's got to be, I think a very, it's a very important to as you're developing to understand your limits, push as hard as you can, but also grow and say, hey, you know what? I couldn't be Mr. Rossi and teach math in high school. I couldn't, because that's not my gig. But the idea that I'm just going to blame every outside force for it, or to the, or even go the step further and say, well, if I did get a perfect score on the SAT, that's just my whiteness. Come on.
Yeah, no, it's a different mindset. It's also as alien to me in the same way that it is to you. Now, a lot of this is, I know James Lindsay, I don't know if you're a fan. I'm a fan of his work around new discourses in his podcast, but to some of the things he's talking about, they jive with what I learned in the 90s around postmodernism and pedagogy and things like that. Going to school, and I didn't study math. I studied French lit and comp lit and philosophy and stuff. And I just got into math later, but it's a lot of it comes from this idea that if you follow the rules of the system, then you're enabling the system. So if you want to be a true revolutionary, you have to have that attitude. You have to sort of presume that what I think is narcissism too, which is that, it's not that I don't have what it takes, is that the system is holding me back, because, until you have that attitude, well, then you're not going to change the system, and that there won't be any human progress unless you have these people that are going to be given critical consciousness to their society. Because if you play by the rules, well, you're just going to recapitulate the mistakes of the existing system.
Yeah, in his book, Kendi,
however functional they may be.
Yeah, in his book, Kendi is, he wonders, man, what would life been like if my dad had pursued that poetry instead of getting a job in accounting, or if his mother had gone this other route, the more revolutionary route, as opposed to getting a job in healthcare, in the health industry.
Your life would have certainly been worse.
Yeah, 100%.
There's no question. Your life would have been have a lot less security, where you wouldn't even be able to entertain these ideas. And if we have a world full of that, then that's what we're going to get.
Right on.
I don't know. I don't have a lot of. I mean, it's okay to wonder about it, but what were his musings? I haven't read it. I confess, I should read it.
It's a consistent. The way that I describe it is it consistently. It's him basically making all these excuses on why one cannot succeed in this system, but then offering all of these biographical details on how exactly what you need to do to succeed in the system. Mm-hmm. It's a thing where going back to, what is education and what are you teaching these kids? And man, I want kids to, grow up, with this idea that try, aspire, do it. You can do it, give it a shot. Not, no matter what you do, you're always going to be held back. And it's because of this, grand unifying theory of whiteness, or whatever the fuck you want to call it.
We know, it's not a mystery. We know what gives encouragement and gives legitimate confidence and legitimate self-esteem. It's success. It's knowing that by a universal measurement that you have achieved real things by doing well, within the context of your environment, right? Whether it's taking this test or doing this thing or socially, same thing, right? You gain confidence socially by making connections with people and having successful interactions. And it doesn't matter how many people are telling you that you succeeded, if you failed, because you can feel it. It's like we have bioengineered, we're not engineered, but we've evolved to have this reaction when we know that we're doing well, and then when we don't, and we've been, the self-esteem movement is a total failure. I know that when I'm trying to learn something on the guitar, I know when I do it well and when I don't, and it doesn't matter if my guitar teacher is telling me, "Yo, man, you're amazing." I'm like, "No, I suck," right? And then they know they suck when they suck. I mean, everyone knows that, and the kids are too smart not to know it. And I see that in the kids. Like, you try to be, there's a way to be encouraging, right? You're not going to tell them they suck. But what if you try this, or let's look at it from this angle, or tell me what you're thinking about this problem, and we can work it out together. And then they get to experience real success, not lowering the bar. When they see the kids in the other classes or next to them that are kicking ass, and they know that they're relatively, and that's okay. It's okay that you're not the best at everything, but be real about it.
Yeah, I think that teaching is such a, I don't know, there are people that I think were really born to do it, and I've been fortunate that I had, I could probably count on my hand like how many just incredible teachers I've had, especially in high school. I had a brother, Jeffrey Pedersen, who was he was such a light in my in my life, and you've been out of teaching for a few years, man. Like how are you holding up? I mean, do you have an opportunity to still, I don't know, connect with, former students or new students, or, what's going on?
I got a lot of energy from teaching. I really enjoyed, and every day I walk into class, I have no idea what was going to happen. I mean, I was prepared. I had my lessons and everything, but there were so many, before this, I worked in technology and things were very predictable. And so I got bored. But when you're a teacher, you're dealing with human beings, and that's never predictable. And you're dealing with young human beings that have problems and difficulties and struggles, and no student's the same as any other student. So you just constantly dealing with different real world people, and it's thrilling and it's great. And if I don't do that, I definitely feel something's missing. Like there's something kind of is draining, like a lack of energy. When I've been giving talks about my experiences and what I think about things to groups of people, and I recapture that, just being in front of an audience and sharing my thoughts and experiences, and taking questions and responding, like that's kind of gives me that feeling again. But I do miss it. I miss it a lot. Yeah. I miss it in my body, like in my bones. Like it really gets to you. It really sustains. Because I remember, you just don't get tired if you're in a room full of kids. Everything I did was on my feet, for every class, moving around, just seeing what they're doing, hearing them, listening to their jokes, the ridiculous things that happen. It's so fun.
I have my younger brother. He's a teacher in high school, and when he talks to me about it, he lights up. You could tell he really loves doing what he's doing, and that's cool to see, especially in someone you care about. It's like, wow, they really love what they're doing.
Yeah. That was me.
That was you. Well, Paul, thank you so much for taking the time to to talk to me. For those of you out there who want to follow Paul's work, it's Paul D. Rossi, Rossi, and that's on Twitter. Throw an at. Was that the ampersand? No, that's not an ampersand. The @ at Paul D. Rossi.
Yeah, at sign, I guess. And I'm also writing pieces for Legal Insurrection, legalinsurrection.com. So you can follow my articles there.
Thank you so much for listening. And again, please order my book, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore, on the death and rebirth of comedy. Just follow the link in the description or head over to Amazon and search for Lou Perez, That Joke Isn't Funny Anymore. And please subscribe to my podcast. Leave a 5-star review. Why not? Sign up for my newsletter at thelouperez.com. And if you want other ways to support my work, you can join thelouperez.locals.com And of course, be sure to support my sponsors, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use promo code LOU for 25% off purchases over $75, and Black Organic Cold Brew, BLVCKBREW.com. Use promo code LOU for free shipping. Thank you.